All right, let's jump into another deep dive. And this one is a big one. We're diving into the ACC Championship game. Clemson versus SMU.
Ooh.
It was a wild one. And again, we're talking about David and Goliath, right?
Absolutely.
We had SMU their first year in the ACC, and they went undefeated.
Undefeated in conference play.
It's incredible. They were the 8th-ranked team in the country, and they had a real shot at the playoffs.
They did.
But, standing in their way,
Oh, yeah.
Clemson,
A powerhouse.
a program that is always hungry,
Yeah.
and this year especially, they wanted to reclaim their spot at the top of college
Oh,
football.
they wanted to remind everyone who they were. They had something to prove.
Exactly. So it really was just a fascinating matchup, I think, just thinking about it on paper before the game.
It was a really interesting one, especially considering how historic SMU's run was. I mean, they were only the 2nd team ever
Wow.
in FBS history to go undefeated in their conference in their very first year.
That's got to be some kind of record.
Right. It's unbelievable. I mean, the last team to do that was Florida State back in '92.
Oh, wow.
And they went on to win the national championship.
So, I got to ask, are we looking at a repeat of history here?
Well, I think with Florida State that year, a big part of their success was their schedule.
Uh-huh.
It was brutal. They played and beat several top-ranked teams.
Oh.
So their strength of schedule was a big factor in solidifying their playoff spot.
It's a strength of schedule. It's
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's rewind a little bit. Let's go back to the ACC Championship game itself. Now, I heard Clemson's first quarter was explosive.
Oh, it was explosive is an understatement.
Yeah.
They came out swinging.
Really?
Kate Klubnik, their quarterback, set an ACC championship record
Wow.
by throwing 3 touchdowns in the first quarter alone.
3 touchdowns.
3 touchdowns in one quarter.
In 1 quarter. That's insane. That's a statement.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for SMU, I mean, it must have felt like a punch in the gut,
Oh, yeah.
especially those first 2 touchdowns, which came within 5 minutes of each other.
Oh, man. Talk about a rude awakening.
Right.
But you know what? SMU didn't just roll over and take it.
No, they didn't. They fought back. They showed incredible resilience.
Maybe he did.
In the third quarter, they managed to narrow the gap, even bringing it within 10 points.
Oh,
After Kevin Jennings connected with Rashard Smith for a touchdown,
okay.
for a moment, it seemed like the momentum was shifting.
So close. But then what? Clemson pulled away again?
They did. Clemson answered right back with another touchdown, extending their lead to 17.
Oof.
But SMU kept battling. It was a tug-of-war for dominance the whole game.
So it sounds like an emotional roller coaster
Absolutely.
for both sets of fans. I mean, can you imagine being there?
Oh, it must have been intense.
So tell me, were there any like controversial moments that could have impacted the game? I heard something about a missed penalty call on Clemson.
Oh, there was. There was a missed face mask penalty on Clemson.
Okay.
And if it had been called, it could have really shifted the field position in SMU's favor. And then there were the personal foul penalties on SMU, including 3 in the first half alone.
Wow.
So these calls, or lack thereof, definitely played a role in the game's flow.
I mean, penalties are always a hot topic,
Always.
especially in a high-stakes game like this.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes you wonder, what if that face mask had been called?
Right.
Could it have changed the outcome of the entire game?
It's impossible to say for sure, but it certainly would have given SMU a much-needed advantage.
Right, and those penalties against them,
Oh, yeah.
those definitely hurt their momentum.
Absolutely. It just goes to show that even the smallest details
Yeah.
can have a huge impact on the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Clemson ultimately won, right? Securing their playoff spot?
They did.
They did.
They did. But it wasn't a flawless victory.
Okay.
Their defense, which is typically their strong suit, wasn't as dominant as we've seen in the past.
Really?
Yeah, they were actually allowing the most points per game since 2015.
That's interesting. I thought Clemson was known for their tough defense. What happened there?
Well, they were particularly vulnerable against the run this season,
Okay.
which raises some questions about their playoff readiness. You know, facing off against other powerhouse teams with strong running games could pose a serious challenge for them.
That's a good point. So even though they won, there's some cracks in the armor, so to speak.
Exactly. This win gets them into the playoffs, but their performance throughout the season, and especially in this championship game, suggests they have some weaknesses to address if they want to make a deep run.
All right, so we've got SMU's Cinderella story, Clemson's not-so-perfect victory, and a whole lot of playoff implications to unpack. But before we get into all that, let's take a quick look at the final score and what it means for both teams. Okay, so give it to me straight. What was the final score? Was it a close one, or did Clemson just run away with it?
It wasn't a total blowout, but Clemson did win comfortably.
Okay.
The final score was 31-24.
A 7-point difference.
Yeah.
So not a total domination, but still a clear win for Clemson. But now the big question on everyone's mind, does SMU still deserve a playoff spot despite this loss?
That is the question, isn't it? It's a tough one to call. I mean, they did lose the championship game.
Right.
But let's not forget about their undefeated run in the conference. I mean, that's impressive no matter how you look at it.
It is.
Especially when you consider it was their first year in the ACC, and their only other loss was to BYU, who was ranked in the top 25 at the time.
That's right. It was a quality loss, as they say.
Yeah.
You know, in the selection committee world.
Right.
It's not like they were losing to teams they should have been beating.
Exactly.
They were playing tough opponents all season.
Yeah, and they were winning consistently.
Exactly. So this brings up a really crucial question about the selection process. What should be prioritized?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I mean, should a conference championship loss really outweigh an entire season of dominant wins?
Yeah.
Especially when you factor in strength of schedule.
It's a really complex debate, so let's break it down. What are the strongest arguments for SMU getting a playoff spot?
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, you got to start with that undefeated conference record. I mean, going undefeated in any Power 5 conference is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
Let alone doing it in your first year.
Yeah.
It shows, adaptability, resilience, and a clear ability to compete at the highest level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like we talked about earlier, their only other loss was to a top-ranked team.
Right.
BYU. So it's not like they were losing to teams they should have been beating.
Nope. They were consistently facing tough opponents
Yeah.
and coming out on top.
So we got an undefeated conference record, a quality loss to a strong opponent. It's a pretty compelling case.
It is.
But of course, there's the other side of the coin, right?
Yeah.
What are the arguments against SMU getting a playoff spot?
Well, the most obvious one is that loss in the championship game.
Right.
The committee really puts a lot of weight on winning your conference. And losing that game, especially to a team like Clemson, doesn't help their case.
Especially since Clemson was ranked lower than them.
Exactly. The championship game is supposed to be the culmination of the season,
Right.
The ultimate test to determine the best team in the conference.
So even though they were dominant throughout the season, that one loss could overshadow all their previous success.
It's definitely a possibility. And some might argue that, despite their undefeated run, the ACC wasn't as strong overall this year compared to other conferences.
That's true.
So their wins, even though impressive, might not carry as much weight as wins against tougher opponents in other conferences.
I see. So it's all relative.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like there are valid arguments on both sides.
There are.
But ultimately, it's not up to us.
Thankfully.
Right. It's up to the selection committee to weigh all the factors and make that final decision.
They have the tough job
They do.
of evaluating these teams
Yeah.
based on a variety of factors. Record strength of schedule quality wins head-to-head results.
It's complicated.
There's no perfect formula.
And that's why college football is so exciting.
Oh, absolutely.
The debates, the controversies, the anticipation, it all adds to the drama.
It's part of the fun.
Exactly. So we started with a single game,
Right.
Clemson versus SMU. And now we're diving into these bigger, more complex questions about, fairness, meritocracy, and how we even define success in college football.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does.
Makes
It
me
reminds us that sports are never just about the final score.
They're not.
They spark conversations, challenge our assumptions,
Yeah.
force us to think critically about the systems in place.
Well said.
So where do we go from here? We have Clemson celebrating their playoff berth, but maybe with some doubts about their overall performance. And then there's SMU left, wondering if their Cinderella story will have a final chapter in the playoffs.
It's a total cliffhanger.
It is.
And as we wait for the selection committee's decision, it's time to turn the question over to you, our listener.
All right, so knowing everything we've talked about, their record, their competition, those controversial calls, and of course that nail-biting championship game, do you think SMU deserves a playoff spot?
It's the question everyone's asking, right? And it's dividing the college football world. Some people are saying, the conference championship should be the deciding factor. A loss is a loss, no matter how good you were during the regular season.
I can see that side of it, for sure. But others argue that a single game shouldn't erase an entire season of dominance, especially when you've got an undefeated conference record and a quality loss against a top 25 team.
It all goes back to what we were discussing earlier. What should the selection committee prioritize? Should a conference championship hold more weight than a team's overall performance? What about strength of schedule?
Yeah, and Is it even fair to compare teams from different conferences when the level of competition is so different?
Right. It's a super complicated issue, and there are no easy answers.
Nope. And this debate goes way beyond just SMU in this particular season. It really makes us think about the playoff system as a whole. Is it really the best way to decide the top 4 teams in the country?
That's where it gets interesting, right? This one game, this one team's journey has sparked a national conversation about the very foundation of college football playoffs.
It really has.
Are they fair? Are they effective?
Big questions.
It's amazing how a single game can cause such a passionate debate.
I know, right?
It really shows you how sports can go beyond the field and make us question our views on bigger issues.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. If you were on the selection committee, what would your decision be? Would you give SMU a chance to prove themselves on the biggest stage? Or would you stick with the traditional emphasis on conference championships?
There's no right or wrong answer, but those are the debates that make college football so captivating.
Every deep dive is a journey,
Yeah.
and this one has taken us through some incredible moments.
Yeah.
Thrilling plays, controversial calls, and those big questions about the sport we love.
Keep those questions coming. Keep exploring and keep diving deep because there's always more to discover.